Hey everybody, what's going on? Dace here, and today we're doing something different, something new. It's actually an idea I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and that's more or less chatting with players. I think it's great that we get to interact in like YouTube comments and whatever other places people are doing this, but something I've always felt is that when it comes to the players that I'm talking to, I feel as though I never really know who they are, how they got into this genre that we are all so passionate about. And so I've been wanting to just start doing these chats where we get to know people a little more and just talk shmups and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm joined here with BareKnuckleRoo, who I've known for probably over a year now, is when I'm not sure how long. It's maybe 2 years when I first saw you comment on one of my videos, and we've kind of like just bounced back and forth here and there. But lately we've gotten into some deep chat about Rolling Gunner. But anyway, how are you doing today, Roo?
Hello. I'm doing pretty fantastic.
Yeah, solid. So
It's been a wonderful day filled with shmups.
yeah, I love it. I know my day has too, or at least the time that I can set aside for that. But yeah, so anyway, why don't we just start with what was your first shmup? How did you get into the genre? What was it about these games that kind of just took hold of you? And maybe you want to just share some of the details about your journey so far, like how long you've been playing and that kind of stuff. Whatever you feel like sharing, really.
I've been playing video games for a really long time. I think the earliest shmups I had were on the NES when I was playing. If you're familiar with Konami's Life Force, the
Yeah.
port that they did for the Nintendo is a really good one. And you know, I was exposed to shoot 'em ups, but it wasn't something that I ever really took all that seriously until I encountered when I was like a teenager, like I was 14 or 15, Gradius 5. That was the first game that I really encountered where it had tiny hitboxes, because the cockpit in that one is considerably smaller than in previous games, to the point where it feels very much like it's a bullet hell, or like a precursor to a bullet hell,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the higher loops and whatnot. So once I got into playing that, I then bounced on to Toho games and some Dojin games like Solid State Survivor. I was never really terribly good at them, but you know, I dabbled in them for some time, and I discovered that, you know, shoot 'em ups and the genre were a really interesting thing, and that there were some great games out there with very interesting survival and scoring mechanics. And then when I had an Xbox 360, I eventually discovered YouTube videos of these crazy looking shoot 'em ups that exposed me to Mushihime Sama Futari. And as it turns
Nice.
out,
Yeah.
there was a region free release for the Xbox 360, so that was one of my earlier imports that I got of a video game. The only other thing I've ever imported before was I got a mod shipped PS2 for some Japanese RPGs, but grabbing my first cave shoot 'em up just to see what all the hype was about was really exciting. I was terrible at it. I could not progress past like stage 3 or 4 for a year, and this was like a year of solid playing. It took a long time for it to actually click for me, but eventually it did. It wasn't my first 1cc though. The first arcade 1cc I got was actually Gigawing.
Oh,
I'd
wild.
Yeah, like I'd encountered it a long time ago in an arcade, like a pizzeria kind of place. But as a kid, I was kind of shy about playing in arcades. I don't know why. You know, the kind of the pressure of playing live in front of other people, sort of
Yeah,
thing. It
exactly.
makes you feel a little self-conscious.
Yeah, and then
And,
when
you know,
and then when the crowd's watching, it's just like even more intense.
well, even if there's not a crowd, it's just it's a little self-conscious playing in front of other people, like in an unfamiliar environment, sort of thing. Like
Yeah.
I was very introverted and whatnot. I hadn't come out of my shell at that point in time when I was a youngin per se.
Yeah.
But I got back into Gigawing, and it was one of those like, hey, I remember this game. I remember seeing it, but I didn't actually get a chance to really, you know, play it, and it really clicked. It was one of those things like I am super into this. I am here for this game. And I played it obsessively until I got the 1cc, and it really wasn't. It was tough, but it wasn't that bad at all. And it was around the same time that shmup started to really click. Like your eyes have to adjust to reading bullet patterns. Your eyes have to get used to seeing attacks and being able to read bullet trajectories. And that's a skill that takes a lot of time to develop sometimes. Like when I first started playing Mishima Sama Futari, I was awful at it. But there was a point in time that it eventually did click, and I was able to start being like, yeah, I can actually see the gaps. I can see what's hitting me, sort of thing. And from there, I just started delving into other arcade shmups. Like, I think the second 1cc I ever got of an arcade game was Escaluda, which is another really good one with a special mechanic that allows you to play for both survival or score, depending on how you use that mechanic.
Fantastic. I love that story. And it's amazing because, a few weeks ago, I think we were even talking about Gigawing since I was tackling it for the first time. And so it's just great to hear a bit of your history with that. Now, what would you say, like over the years, did you have any periods where you kind of came away from the games, or were you just all in right from the start?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's healthy necessarily to play one game super obsessively, because you're going to risk burnout on it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like I was playing shmups and only shmups that during that period. I'm fond of other games. Like there's a number of RPG series I play. I dabble in the occasional rhythm game. I'm not really one for real-time strategy, but puzzle games I enjoy too.
Nice.
So I was focusing a lot on shoot 'em ups at the time, but I wouldn't say that I went completely all in to the point of missing out on a number of other games that I wouldn't have been able to play. I don't necessarily think it's super healthy to focus too much on any one particular game.
Yeah.
Because then you miss out on the variety and the what's out there. It's good to have a well-rounded mix of games. I mean, if you click with a game to the point where it's all you want to play, that's fine too. But there's a lot of games out there I want to experience, so I don't necessarily want to focus too much on any one particular game either.
Yeah, I hear that. That's something I really just kind of like put into practice in my own life, because I love having. I'm currently not playing anything right now other than Rolling Gunner, just because I love it and I just cannot get enough. But typically I like to have like a longer RPG of some sort on the go, or whatever else, something more casual to kind of just kick back with after training sessions or runs or whatnot. So yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from with that. So
yeah, having a relaxing game to sink your teeth into, when that you can play it without needing to invest too much effort to get good at it. Arcade racers like that are for me, like the Wangan Midnight games or Outrun 2006 or 2SP are especially the ones that I would gravitate towards for that.
Yeah, nice. So I have a bunch of questions. The order doesn't really matter. So I'm kind of curious, what would you say has been like your biggest struggle with these types of games, and or what have been some of your favorite titles of all time? And then maybe we can even just chat about some Rolling Gunner as well, because I know we both love that. And what's crazy to me is, like, even though I loved it back in the past, now that I'm getting into it again, it's just a whole other level of just plunging in, just loving every second of it. It's just bonkers how this game has gripped me this time around. But yeah, go for it.
It's a fantastic game. To circle back to your previous question, I think I find that if I get into a game, like really obsessively into a game, I go through about 2-month periods where it will be pretty much all that I play.
Yeah.
And then I'll try and pull back from it a bit. In terms of the biggest challenges I've had, there have been some games where you're trying to achieve a hurdle, and then you hit a point where you almost burn out, because it feels like, am I just not going to be able to do this? Is it going to be a game where I just can't quite overcome this particular hurdle? there have been a couple of games that I've played where I was feeling like I was almost there, with like within striking distance of a certain accomplishment, and it just wasn't quite coming together, which was really kind of frustrating. The Rolling Gunner was like that for a period of time, where it was really difficult to get the true last boss clear, because
Oh my god.
In order to get to the true last boss in Rolling Gunner, you don't have to just clear the final boss one credit. You have to clear the final boss with a good enough rank to trigger it, and because the true last boss in the original mode, and also expert obviously, is sufficiently difficult that you need a ton of resources. I need at least 2 lives and 3 bombs to be able to clear the TLB and Rolling Gunner. Otherwise, it's hopeless. There was also a game that I was playing for score that didn't seem to get too much attention, called Ryga Stratofighter. It was a game that I really got into because it was interesting to play something that had the shooting front and back kind of thing that is in Cave's Death Smiles, and seeing that executed in the game far earlier than it had. Like I knew nothing about it, but I'd heard about it. Ryga Stratofighter is a really fun and exciting older game that I was playing for score pretty seriously. Like I was at the point where I had practiced it to beat both loops as a no miss run with as many lives as possible.
Jeez.
It felt like I was close to the world record at one point, but then I realized that my math was a little bit off. But as it turns out, apparently, I have the highest recorded score on YouTube. I don't know how I accomplished that, because I'm obviously missing something, because I'm quite far from the world record. But the problem is that there's no footage, apparently, of the world record holder having posted it. So there's some kind of trick I'm missing. I'm not sure what the trick is. It's compounded by the fact that there's actually random 1-ups, and they count for a fair bit at the end of the game, so it's a bit of a janky game. It's not one I would necessarily say is great to play for score, but it would be nice to be able to go back to it and rediscover what it is I'm missing about the score there.
Yeah.
But even if you can't accomplish something like that, the trying to push your skills and trying to see how far you can push the game is just as fun. It's not necessarily a failure, even if you know what. I've gotten to the final boss in this game. If I can't 1cc it, it's not necessarily the end of the world.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the reality is that not everyone has enough time in their lives to dedicate to playing games. I mean, you're a family man. You know what that's about. You have to invest your time in such a way that you maintain the connections in your life without, dedicating yourself to only video games, because that's not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. Just about what you said about, like, okay, if you're not going to clear a game. Just recently, like in I think one of the last coffee and shmups videos I did, I touched on the fact that Giga Wing for me was so fun that, like, I knew I was going to clear it, because like I set my mind on that, and I was just going to do it, and the progress was showing that it was going to pan out. But there was this thought that was just like, wow, this game is such a blast. I don't care if I were to not just, like, if I just decide right now I don't need to clear it, I'm just not going to play it ever again. That would be totally fine, because it had just been so incredibly fun and fulfilling for me. And I think sometimes if you're not in a situation, like, just for whoever's listening, like, I think sometimes if you kind of get so far into a shmup and you just feel like, oh, okay, I'm running out of steam here, like, I'm not sure whether you don't know whether you want to stick with it to actually clear it, you can always come back. You can always come back like 8 months later. Sometimes I have done that for certain games that I've made it to the final boss in Shikondo on hard mode 8 months ago, and I just did, for whatever reason, I didn't stick with it. It's not that I didn't intend to come back, but when I did come back, I just had a fresh perspective. I was seeing things differently, and you just have, like a major recharge from all that time you weren't playing. And so I think it's important to not always like feel as though like when you come away from a game, that means you have to give up either. It's kind of just allowing yourself time to come away.
It's often very helpful to take a break, like of a week or two from a game, and then come back to it feeling refreshed.
Yeah,
If you play one game constantly and nothing else, you can start to feel a little bit mentally burnt out. But sometimes it's beneficial to actually take a break and play something else.
hmm,
If you play a game that's in a similar genre, you can sometimes develop strategies or come up with ideas based on playing that different game when you revisit what it was that you were challenging yourself with.
totally.
And I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with playing a game that you're bad at either. I mean, lots of artists in the world say they think they're bad at painting, but they still paint because it's what they enjoy, sort of thing.
Hmm.
So
Oh yeah,
if the game is fun to you, you don't necessarily have to be really good at it in order to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with not being a great arcade game player if you enjoy the games.
yep, totally. And I couldn't agree more with just that's one thing I love about shmups is just how the skill sets feel transferable. Um, Not even necessarily just in like from one game to the other, but just as a quick example, in my rolling gunner sessions these days, I have always really struggled with the final attack that the stage 2 boss does. And that I just said, okay, you know what, I'm going to leave it for now. I'm going to just practice stage 3. And there's a sort of similar attack. It's not really, but one of the halfway bosses does this attack. And that somehow I feel as though that kind of just gave me a bit of a better understanding. And now when I do the stage 2, it's a lot less hectic dealing with that final attack. So sometimes just kind of letting go and letting yourself not figure things out right away is a great way to go about it too.
That swirly spiral attack, you'll have to edit it into the video for this, but it is definitely a unique attack in that you don't really see too many attacks that use that kind of a pattern in shoot 'em ups.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very unusual one to have to read, and yeah, the stage 3 mid boss that uses that other one has it's very similar.
Yeah.
So getting good at one naturally will help you get good at the other. You don't have to frustrate yourself with being bad at one particular part of the game and then feeling like, oh, I have to get good here before I go on.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of why I like games that provide a little bit of leeway and bombs that let you say, okay, you know what, I'm not good at this spot. Let me dump my resources on it so I can go on and focus my energies on learning another part of the game.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't tend to play games that are a little bit more aggressive in terms of resource use, where you don't really have much in the way of resources. Ikaruga is an example of a game like that that's very all or nothing. You don't really have much in the way of resources in Ikaruga. If you don't know a section, you die. You don't have any bombs to fall back on. Your charge shot meter is not super helpful for clearing a difficult spot because you're going to get smacked by something. Whereas a game like Rolling Gunner that gives you a lot of freedom in terms of how you use your power-up mode, in terms of how you use your very long-lasting bombs, it's very forgiving in a way that encourages you to get good both at survival and at scoring at your own pace. There's a similar game mechanically to Rolling Gunner that came out beforehand. Rolling Gunner is kind of like a less fangs bared kind of version of Crimson Clover. Crimson Clover's double break system, where you basically can power up twice, is very much like Rolling Gunner's. It came out beforehand. Rolling Gunner, as far as I know, is meant to be a reference to that. But in Crimson Clover, your bombs are far weaker, they last a lot less long, and if you use your double power up, once you're in that mode, it's very much a risk versus reward. You can't bomb your way out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas Rolling Gunner, you can always bomb your way out of a dangerous situation. And Rolling Gunner is also a really good example of a game that has rewarding novice modes. There's some arcade ports that have had novice modes that unfortunately have felt a little bit disappointing because there's not much meat on the bones in terms of being able to interact with the scoring system. Whereas Rolling Gunner in novice and in casual, even in those easier modes, you can still take full advantage of the power-up system and learn to use it effectively for score. It's fun and engaging without being overwhelmingly difficult. And it's a great example of a game that offers a difficulty mode for all skill levels, because novices is tailored for like the true never played a shmup before kind of of play or casual is a great mode for audiences who are comfortable with video games, but not necessarily terrific at shoot 'em ups or whatnot. It provides a good challenge for those players, and for better players who want something that's not quite as difficult as the other modes. It's also good there too. And then you've got the higher difficulty modes for people who are wanting a much more hardcore arcade difficulty kind of game. It works very well that way in terms of what it offers.
I definitely agree. I feel it's a very well-rounded game and experience. Like novice mode, if you're a player and you know how to clear games because you've done it before, like that's not going to pose an issue. But even with like the experience I have, casual mode still took me some days, like a few days, I think, just to like crack that, because I was getting into the game again after 2 years of not playing. And it's just crazy what that mode will still throw at you, even though it is more on the casual side compared to original and expert. But I love the challenge in that game. I just love everything about it. The movement, the aiming. We've talked a bit about the DLC Overpower. Maybe you want to talk about that version a little bit and just share your thoughts on that.
Overpower is basically an arrange mode, similar to how Cave, whenever they've ported their games to consoles, have included different arrange modes. It's different and interesting. I'm not necessarily sure it's as fun as the original mode. Basically, what they've done is they've changed it to a twin stick game. The controls no longer work as well for an arcade stick. It's not as responsive in terms of the time lag between holding down the focus button and going into the focus mode. It works a lot better as a twin stick game. So to get the best experience out of it, you have to play it there. It's very much about bullet canceling. I don't know if I'm missing an element of the scoring system to really grasp how to appreciate it. There's a lot of bullet canceling, and it feels like a lot of the patterns can be trivialized. Most of what seems to hit you is actually the revenge bullets that are spawned when enemies blow up or when you cancel stuff. It's not actually the patterns themselves that you have to worry about dodging, but all the incidental stuff that gets spawned as a result of the rank getting cranked up.
Yeah.
It's very nice that they've allowed you to use the soundtrack, the remix soundtrack, in whatever mode you want, that sort of thing, which is appreciated. So even if you're not into necessarily the game mode itself for the DLC, having the option of the other soundtrack is really cool as well. I'm sure it will appeal to folks who've never played something that's really over the top in terms of the amount of bullet canceling that's going on and just the sheer amount of stuff that's on screen. But because there's not quite as much stuff to actually dodge, I'm not sure it's conceptually as good a game as the original. It's interesting, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I personally never felt drawn to jump into Overpower. I think there was just something so compelling about the original game. Just I absolutely love just what it demands of you with the way it works, and I love it. I really do want to just keep chipping away and just get better and better at the game. Like everything about it, just the music, everything, visuals, the bosses. Another thing I noticed, it's not that other games don't have like little scenes in between stages, but the scenes in this game look really, really well done, in my opinion. And it's just a nice touch seeing all these additional things that they've done just to make it that much more of a great experience and a polished.
The animated cutscenes are really fantastic. They're actually probably the best end of stage segments that are in any shmup I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
For the in between stage cutscenes, they're fantastic.
Oh yeah,
it's very impressive how they managed to animate them using just like 2D assets. You can actually poke around in the PC version for the assets, because all of the assets in the at least for the original DVD release, all of the assets are uncompressed, and you can just go in and take a look at them, and it's really impressive what they did with it to create it. Kudos to them.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I know too much about the creators, but we were chatting the other day, and they did have another game out from before, and they also have a new one that I'm not sure when that's supposed to be ready it's probably still fairly early in the process, but yeah, I'm pretty stoked. If it's anything like what they've done in Rolling Gunner, like holy smokes, like we're in for an experience, that is for sure.
Oh yeah, their earliest game, Galaxy Frontier, was an interesting Dojin release. It didn't get too much attention, I don't think, but it's a neat little game. It's also it's very heavily focused around bullet canceling, but I think it does a better job of doing the bullet canceling than Overpower, because in between bullet cancels, you have to recharge your meter. You can't just bullet cancel all the time. There's a recharge period, so it feels a bit more like Gigawing, a very crazy version of Gigawing in terms of the amount of stuff you can cancel back, compared to Overpower. The developer, as far as I know, of Rolling Gunner has serious arcade chops though. Like they've done games for Cave, included working on
Crazy.
Katana and Death Smiles 2, as far as I know.
Wild.
They've probably worked on other games. I'm not super familiar with their credits. I did not look it up beforehand to refresh my memory there.
Yeah, no worries.
They have worked on actual arcade releases, so it's not surprising that the developers were able to come up with a great game, because they know what works mechanically. They have experience on other games of this style to know kind of what they had in mind.
Oh yeah.
And the way the revenge bullets work in Overpower is actually somewhat reminiscent of how Death Smiles 2 and Akai Katana handle bullets coming at you when you're using your special abilities. So all that it does definitely resemble their other works. You can see some of their inspiration in there.
Yeah, nice. That's one thing I always appreciate in shmups, when there's just a particular type of pressure that I experience. Like I've had that in Gunnail, Rolling Gunner, of course, Gigawing especially, because like just sometimes when you have that slow motion period and you're just waiting for that last 2 seconds before you can use your barrier, and you're just like inching away from this huge cloud of bullets, and then boom, you can just save yourself for another moment or two. It's such a ride, and it's just like that in Rolling Gunner. Sometimes you want to creep closer to the boss to get more medals, but you got to be backing away too, because it's just getting too intense, but you're so close to having that next burst ready, your hyper mode or whatever it's called. I forget the term they use, but I love stuff like that. It's just so exciting to me.
They did a really great job of making the power up mode and limiter release. Like the first hyper is power up, and the second one is limiter release, as far as I know. Call it hyper just after Dodonpachi Daifukatsu that kind of coined the term.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did a really great job of making that kind of mechanic engaging. It's fun and satisfying seeing the swirl of orbs fly out when you activate it. The visuals are fantastic. The bombs look really nice and exciting. Instead of just like a blob of explosions, you have the screen rattling and shaking.
Yeah.
As the bomb basically just shatters everything. It's one of the better looking bombs in a Dojin game that I can think of. They did a really good job overall with the presentation.
Oh yeah.
Some of the background assets and whatnot may not look as nice as a game that's had a much bigger art budget to produce the sprite work and whatnot. But for a Dojin release that got sold at Comic Cat, I think, to begin with, it looks pretty darn good to me.
Yeah, I cannot get enough. Anytime I'm in stage 3, that's like the whole the Sunset Canyon type level with the incredible orange and pink rocks, and it's just beautiful. I get that like some of the more like pavement style levels aren't gonna look the greatest, but there are some truly shining parts to the stage design or like the art and all that stuff. It's just fantastic.
Oh yeah, there's some fantastic elements there. I think I don't think it looks necessarily as nice as games that used full-on pixel art, like the stuff from Toa Plan era games or Cave games.
Mm-hmm.
But doing pre-rendered 3D artwork and converting that to sprite is a good way of being able to create assets quickly without the time involved in making the sprites, and is easier from a standpoint if you're not necessarily an artist per se.
Yeah.
And I think what they worked with, they did a good job. It's stylish. The assets are pretty good, and there's a lot of really good background set pieces. There's also some really interesting stuff that comes out and surprises you, stuff that I haven't actually seen or felt in another game of that style. Like the stage 4 mid boss, that suddenly another life bar appears and comes up behind you. The first time you experience that, it's a blast.
Oh yeah.
There's some really great moments and opportunities in there to experience. Same goes with the wall fight and
Oh my
stage
god.
6.
Yeah.
Rolling Gunner has a lot of really cool stuff to see, and I think as a game that as like a first shmup to engage with, if you're looking for your first bullet hell shoot 'em up, it's a great choice. You can't go wrong with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's another part of what I love about just the particular type of pressure Rolling Gunner unleashes upon the player, or at least when I feel it when I play it. Like you say, just being surprised by like half a boss coming up behind you, or just the same thing that you were shooting in front of you, but now it's behind you. They do this incredible job of just kind of putting you in, like sandwiching you into these tricky, tight situations where you just suddenly you got to be thinking fast. You got to be like calculating, okay, what do I prioritize? Do I start shooting backwards too, or do I finish off the thing in front of me first? Like, it's incredible stuff. Like, I could just go on and on about this game, but yeah.
And they did a fantastic job of making the multi-directional aiming work really fluidly. It feels better than games where you're relying on kind of an auto aiming element to it. Like for instance, Cave made a horizontal shoot 'em up called Pro Gear, where basically your lock-on shot would have your gun pods basically automatically turn to aim at enemies, and most people would gravitate towards the ones that had the gun pods turn quickly, because the shot type with the slowest turning gun pods has a lot of trouble aiming at stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas in Rolling Gunner, because you're in control of where you're aiming, it feels a lot more. It feels a lot more like the player is engaged and involved in the process. And once once it clicks with you, once you figure out, making those little taps to adjust the position of your gun pod, then lock it back into place to deal with something that's behind you, it's really super satisfying. I think it's one of the most fun multi-directional shoot 'em ups that I've ever played.
Yep, I totally feel the same way about that. When I first got Rolling Gunner, I was using the Pro controller, but there was something calling to me just to get an arcade stick. And I'm not saying like, oh, people have to play with an arcade stick to like have a better feel, but for me, it just felt even better making those small adjustments that you mentioned, just super quick. And that's one of the main things I love about this game. It's just knowing, okay, something's coming here, something's coming there. I just got to do all these quick taps here, like all over the place, just to stay on top of everything. Because unlike a lot of games where you're just shooting things that come from the top of the screen or the right side, things can come from everywhere, and they do come from everywhere. It keeps the pressure on thick, and the pace and the action, it's just relentless. It's so good.
Yeah, I can hear you wanting a stick. I was playing the Aleste collection with a Pro controller, and it wasn't the same. The Switch's default controllers are fine for 3D games and whatnot, but I don't think I like them in terms of their precision for an arcade shoot 'em up.
Yeah.
So being able to use an arcade stick on the Switch was really handy. I was fortunate that I discovered Mayflash makes a little kind of a USB stick looking thing called the NS, the Magic NS, that allows you to actually use like an old 360 controller. So for $20, I was able to actually use one of my old Hori controllers on the Switch, and I was expecting a ton of input lag, but no, it works great. Having a stick sometimes feels a lot better than the D-pad, especially because your thumb can't really make the rapid up-down movements that you'll sometimes want to have in a game on a D-pad, whereas it's easier to make those kind of up-down movements on a stick or even on a keyboard, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting because after I cleared Crimson Clover Arcade Original, I had used the Pro controller for that, just like the stick on that controller, and that was with like some drift issues here and there. So after that, I was just like, screw this. I'm done Crimson Clover. I'm not using this thing again, and I switched to D-pad, which I find is amazing for like retro, like old school stuff, like Gunnail.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use anything but D-pad for that game, and I love it. But something like Rolling Gunner, obviously, stick for me is the way to go, and it just feels super intuitive once you just get into the flow that you need to kind of adopt. Because at first it's just going to feel like wonky, it's going to feel clumsy and all this stuff, but yeah, you just got to allow that adjustment period to run its course, and then it just feels incredible.
Oh yeah, there was definitely an adjustment period of learning to play on a stick. I remember when I first started hanging out with the local arcade crowd. I'm fortunate that there's an arcade group that I was introduced to and got to meet that helps me engage more with shmups. I had never really played with a stick before that. I hadn't really, had an excuse to. I was still just playing on a D-pad for an Xbox 360 controller for a lot of games. There's a definite adjustment period learning to use a stick. But once you get kind of the muscle memory in there of how you're supposed to move to control yourself and whatnot, it is really preferable to a D-pad in a lot of situations. You don't have the problem that D-pads have of accidental diagonals.
Oh yeah,
That's the one reason that I've kind of had a falling out with D-pads, despite being a kid that grew up with NES and Super Nintendo and all that. The D-pads have an inherent lack of precision, and it's difficult sometimes to tell if your inputs actually registered and pressed down hard enough, especially if you're playing on a controller where the contacts are in need of a little bit of cleaning. Whereas that satisfying click that tells you that, yeah, the stick is registered, that is also really handy when you're playing a video game.
yeah, for sure. So I'm not sure, like, I suppose like I could just talk about Rolling Gunner all night, but I also don't want to like take up too much of your time. Maybe one more thing I'm curious about though. What would you, and it doesn't need to be in like the hardest difficulty, but just in general, out of all the difficulties you've played in Rolling Gunner, what was kind of the one thing that tripped you up the most, or maybe the one thing that just gave you the biggest surprise out of anything, or just like, wow, they did this. This is the coolest thing. If anything comes to mind in that sense.
I'm not sure if there's any one particular thing that I can think of. I do really appreciate the true last boss being a shout out to Galaxy Frontier in terms of how it attacks. When you realize that, oh hey, this is actually a prequel to their earlier game, the TLB becomes pretty cool. Its last attack is a direct shout out to the final boss in Galaxy Frontier. I really liked how they balanced the original and expert difficulties, and that you can actually kind of tailor the game to suit your tastes because of how the rank system works. The game is very transparent with how hard the game is getting. The better you play, the more score you can potentially get, but also the harder the game gets. The game dynamically adjusts its difficulty depending on how well you're scoring. So you're encouraged to play a harder game by scoring well. But if you're having difficulty or you just want to beat that mode, you can deliberately keep rank low, and by using manual bombs and whatnot, you can get through the game at a low rank in once the game. Even a true last boss clear, you don't have to jack it all the way up to the max rank to see the true last boss. Expert was a really nice difficulty mode in that it felt difficult, but I could see what needed to be done to clear it. It didn't feel insurmountably difficult. It didn't feel wildly harder than original. It felt like, okay, I have to tighten down what I'm doing in certain spots, and obviously getting a true last boss clear is not going to happen anytime soon for me, because that's just requiring too much additional skill. But I can get a normal 1cc if I can, tighten down and improve these key sections.
Yeah.
And so it felt like a really well balanced experience overall to be able to progress naturally from one difficulty mode to the next. If I had to say which way to play the game in terms of difficulty progression, I'd say obviously novice, casual, and then an original, just a normal, clear, don't worry about the secret boss. And then honestly, getting a true last boss clear of original was probably as hard as an expert clear was in terms of the amount of effort it took, because the rank has a serious impact in original difficulty, and that took a lot more learning to manage the game at a high rank and play it for score while trying to trigger the true last boss, compared to expert, where basically I could play it purely for survival and focus just on, okay, bomb everything that's scary, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I like that you mentioned just how you can kind of see what needs to be done, and it's not just this huge mountain of impossibility. It's more or less the same for me. Like, I'm getting closer and closer to clearing original, just like a straight up survival run, but I can clearly see what is preventing it so far, and every single time it's just taking a hit with 5 or 6 bombs in stock, and it's just like, okay, I gotta really just use these bombs, because think how far I would actually get if I was never losing a handful. And it's just great kind of seeing that, like, you can do it. It's not an impossible game, but you just really got to smarten up with your resources and actually put this stuff to use.
Well, when we were discussing before in the YouTube comments about how it's also really important to make use of your manual bombs because of the impact they have on lowering rank. Once you realize that, and how little rank you drop compared if you accidentally get hit and use an auto bomb, which depletes your entire bomb stock. That's another important element, is that learning to use your bombs isn't just important for saving yourself in the moment. You're also lowering your rank and making the rest of the game more manageable in the long run. When you started out playing shoot 'em ups, did you go from a period where, like, I can't see what hit me, I don't understand what even managed to destroy me? Did you go from that to a point where it's like, oh yes, I can actually see what hit me? Yes, I saw that bullet hit me.
That's actually a great question. I started with Staredin on Switch in, I think, 2018, and that was crazy. I was also coming back into gaming more or less for the first time in like a long time, like years and years. So I think everything was kind of just like something to get used to, whether it was a shmup or a platformer or what have you. So I don't actually remember if I had those moments. I'm sure I must have had some, but I don't recall one way or another exactly, so I'm not too sure.
I've had people who've watched me play shoot 'em ups comment, "Oh, I didn't even see what hit you. Right? I can't even see what you're dodging or how you're moving."
Yeah.
But it's, and like I can understand that, because when you're first learning this kind of game, there's a definite adjustment period to learning to train your eyes to actually see what's going on screen, because there's a lot of information to take in. But eventually, as you get better, you do realize that in a lot of very bullet dense games, a lot of the shots that are being fired at you are basically eye candy.
Yeah,
they're there to make the screen look pretty, but they're not necessarily actually something to be scared of, or they don't necessarily put you in danger. And there's also more games that allow you to just tap dodge. As long as you make a quick tap movement, you'll avoid the attack, because only one bullet is actually aimed directly at you. The rest are aimed kind of around you.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me of something. The halfway boss in stage 2, the green tank. I remember I was still fairly new to tackling these games seriously at the time, and I remember I discovered tap dodging, and I felt as though I had just cracked this big secret, even though, like, I now know, okay, it's like every game you can pretty much just tap dodge, like it's a fundamental thing. But at the time I was like, oh my god, like this simple trick that I discovered, oh my god, look at me. It was just funny, like as an amateur, like you kind of have those moments where you think you've like just blown something wide open and you've discovered this big thing, but it's like, no, that's how a lot of these games work.
Well, and it speaks to how good the games are, like as a genre as a whole, in terms of shoot 'em ups being simple but still really deep. Mechanically, they appear to be simple. Oh, just move and shoot. But the positioning, the way you move, there's nuanced elements that when you play the games at a higher level, you can really appreciate how deep they are, even if they appear to be simple to play.
Mm-hmm.
And are mechanically not as complex as games that have like a lot of different controls and different buttons and whatnot. There's still a lot you can do in terms of like bullet hoarding, double backing on patterns, that sort of thing, misdirection, sealing bullets in games where going up close and attacking enemies at close range causes them to stop shooting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuanced elements that basically you have to look to skilled players who provide these kind of resources and tutorials, or it's the sort of thing that gets passed through video or word of mouth. And like there's no shame in having to discover tap dodging is a thing, because that lots of other people, I'm sure, did the same thing. They didn't know that tap dodging was a thing until they kind of had to figure it out for themselves, and then things get passed on to other players like, hey, this trick is really handy.
Oh, yeah.
That's part of the reason why I enjoy being able to chat with other folks who are playing the games, because it kind of gives you that same experience you might have had playing in an arcade, where you're able to watch other people play and chat with other folks who love the games and basically use each other as a resource.
Yeah.
I remember friends would send pictures of Japanese arcades where they actually had like hint booklets for stuff like Tower of Draga, where everyone would write down what they discover, what works, what secrets and tricks and whatnot. And so basically when you're playing at an arcade, it was kind of like a bit of a community effort kind of thing going on.
That's so cool. I love that. And that's what I do really enjoy about these games, is just how much learning there is. Like, it's just the kind of thing. Like, I grew up loving RPGs, and I still play them, of course, and other genres. Like, I've played all sorts of stuff, but there's something about shmups that just really pulls me in, and I think it's part of it anyway, is just the fact that they can be very strict with teaching you, and there is just a ton to learn and a ton to improve on in these games, and there's just something really special about that for me anyway.
What's your favorite RPG?
Oh, that is like an answer of 10 different titles. Like The Legend of Dragoon, I love Chrono Cross, Final Fantasies, Alundra, holy smokes, that's like one of the best. There are way too many to list off.
I haven't gotten to play Legend of Dragoon in a while. I hear it doesn't work well with PS2s anymore, so I'd have to bust out my old PS1, but lately what I've been playing is either real-time games like the Tales of series.
Mm-hmm.
There's recently been a translation of Tales of Destiny,
cool.
remake for PS2, which is really good. And I'm a huge sucker for wizardry-style dungeon crawlers, so if I'm ever needing a break from a shoot-'em-up, that's generally what I play.
Yeah, nice.
My guilty pleasure.
Yeah, for me, it could be all over, like just anything super, super relaxing that's just very low-key. Like, I love Stardew Valley, but just anything that you can kind of just wander around and do your own thing with peaceful music. That's kind of my vacation style game after doing something intense with shmups.
What are kind of your goals for Rolling Gunner now? I know you've been working hard at it ever since you got back into it. And your casual video that went through the commentary and whatnot was a really great watch. I hope it's a fantastic resource for other people who are wanting to get into the game. What are you kind of hoping to accomplish going forward with it? Do you have any goals that you've set in mind?
Well, the bare minimum for me is, right now anyway, just clearing original with kind of just with the current approach that I'm using. So for the most part, I'm doing the first 3 stages, no miss, no bomb.
Right on.
Yeah, and I get that there's pretty much no way I'm going to trigger the TLB. So an additional goal for like another clear would just be to actually switch modes, or like switch how I play, and do an original plus TLB. I do really want to clear expert mode as well. So the aim is original and expert, and that's more or less from there we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's kind of just the bare minimum stuff.
You might well be surprised. You might end up triggering the TLB unexpectedly if you start using the power-ups a lot in the last couple of stages, because you don't need rank all that high if you're able to get a couple big scoring sections.
Yeah, that's good.
On.
Yeah, that's good to know. I haven't really started, like, in terms of what I'm practicing, I haven't dipped into stages 5 and 6 in terms of thinking about, okay, how do I want to break this down, figure it all out. So that'll be something that will be interesting, because if I can do that and get triggered the TLB, that would be fantastic. But if not, then it's just something I can chip away at another time too.
It's the sort of game that's got enough resources that if you're able to get a certain distance into the game, you can kind of muddle your way through the rest of it if you have enough resources.
Yeah.
The last few stages are tough, but if you have enough familiarity with the game to kind of, improv or sight dodge stuff, it's not something you need to completely have every single section memorized either, which is nice.
Yeah.
There's nothing too nasty, except for maybe the end of one of the elevator shafts in stage 6 has a couple of ambushes that you want to know about, but that's no worse than any of the stuff that shows up in, like, say, Pro Gear or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's your thought on vertical versus horizontal shoot 'em ups? Do you find that the orientation has a big impact in terms of how easy it is to play the game, or are you kind of agnostic in terms of that you don't really care whether or not the screen is oriented vertically or horizontally?
That's a great question. I would say I don't care. I just naturally happen to play more vertical shmups than I do horizontal, but when I do get into a horizontal game, it really doesn't matter. I think for me it's more about, okay, this game is amazing and it just happens to be horizontal, so I'm playing it, or it just happens to be vertical, so great. I don't really ever seem to struggle because of the orientation or anything, so...
I know I've heard some people who've mentioned that they've struggled because the game is a horizontal ratio game, or like a horizontal orientation,
Mm-hmm.
a horizontal aspect ratio. And I'd encourage everyone who wants to get into horizontal games more, even just bullet hell shmups, to try Rolling Gunner, because it is a very approachable game in terms of it keeps everything very fair. Enemies that come from all sides, you have these little warning indicators that pop up. You're not going to get smacked by something that isn't given fair warning of an advance. And because of how you have to manually aim and adjust your aim, it's also got a really good incentive to train your eyes to look in different directions and whatnot. So I think it's a great game for getting into both bullet hell style games and horizontals in general, if that's not your usual cup of tea. I think I'm fortunate in that a lot of what I used to play was naturally horizontal anyways. Like, I grew up playing a variety of shoot 'em ups on MS-DOS and whatnot.
Wow.
As a kid. So playing with a keyboard and playing Hories was not by any means an unusual experience for me. And then, of course, most of the stuff that I would play on, like, the NES or whatnot were also horizontal games. I didn't actually have any experiences with a true vertical shoot 'em up until I was an adult. It just wasn't a thing that I knew about. Everything was a horizontal screen you used. Rotating the screen, what is that even a thing? Like,
Yeah, you just don't think of that sort of stuff unless you've seen someone do it before. Yeah, well, I suppose we've covered a pretty decent chunk of just sharing a little bit about Rolling Gunner, maybe encouraging people to get into the game. Is there anything else, like, in terms of parting words or encouragement, or do you feel like we've more or less done that well enough? Because we can
I
probably...
think what I would say to anyone who's wanting to get more into these games, or not even shoot 'em ups, just any kind of game in general, is don't be afraid to engage with players on social media, on videos, that sort of thing. Don't be afraid to ask comments, because generally speaking, players who are dedicated to a game and really enjoy playing a particular game, who are obsessed about a particular game, and I know I have a couple of games I'm obsessed with, they generally enjoy talking to new players and players who genuinely want to learn. Like, whole reason I have the handle I use online was because nobody had any footage of Streets of Rage 3 with a full playthrough of Rue at the time. This was years and years ago. Since then, people have done like deathless runs and whatnot. So very much better players than me have showcased their chops at Streets of Rage 3. But I've gone on to be very dedicated at some particular games, like in not just shoot 'em ups, but Bayonetta, Streets of Rage remake, and it's nice to be able to chat with folks who want to know and get to the game, and I'm happy to provide information. And it's the same with anyone else who is really into a game. Generally speaking, folks who are really passionate about a particular game love to share information about it. So don't be afraid to ask questions, or they're generally going to respond positively to that sort of thing, and be willing to provide information.
Yeah.
The shmup community is great because there's not a tremendous amount of elitism that is overt. A lot of the players who are big name players on YouTube are very, very friendly and welcoming to that kind of viewer engagement, not just on YouTube, but also other social media platforms and whatnot. And it's a great way to keep the genre and keep interest in the games alive by keeping discussion flowing around them.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. So yeah, I think with that said, we can close this out. But I really, really appreciate you being here, man. Thank you so much for setting aside some time to do this chat. And where can people find you if they want to check out some of your own stuff?
I basically just maintain a YouTube channel for the time being at youtube.com/BareKnuckleRoo. I generally post shoot 'em up related stuff, but I'll also occasionally post some other miscellaneous odds and ends on my channel. I'm also a really obsessive Bayonetta player, so a lot of my content is geared at Bayonetta. I'm probably taking a hiatus from that, but I would say that right now probably half of my recent content has Bayonetta related stuff. I've also got some good rolling gunner clears. I want to get back into that for scoring, because I know that my scores aren't really high tier or whatnot. I don't consider myself a great shoot 'em up player by any means. I'm not super proficient at scoring. I have a few games under my belt that I can say, yeah, I'm pretty darn good at, but I wouldn't call myself like super world tier, a super player class, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to showcase good content and get people into games that I like. And part of the reason I put stuff on YouTube is because I want to see other people discover cool, obscure games that I didn't know anything about until I found them. Like Halley's Comet was a game that just completely flew under my radar. The name sounded cool because there was an educational game for the Commodore 64 called the Halley Project. And then it turns out that Taito made a shoot 'em up called the Halley's Comet, and it turns out that's really, really cool for a game that was, I think, 1986 or so. It feels really modern. Your shot powers up to this gigantic spread shot. The music's actually kind of cool. I want other people to be able to kind of make discoveries around the same kind of games that went obscure and unknown for me for so long. So that's basically why I post a lot of content to YouTube, because I think it's important that if you have something that you're passionate and that you enjoy, it's important to share it and expose other people to that kind of thing.
Totally. 100% agree. Yeah. Well, okay. With that said, thanks again so much for being here. I really appreciate that. And I'm trusting everyone who has been listening has really enjoyed this chat. I know I have. This has been a blast. It's just been great hearing your voice and getting to hear a little bit about your history with the games, and everything else has just been awesome. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing your chats with other players in the community.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, everybody have a solid day, and let us know what you think in the comments, and we will see you next time. Take care.